Hey artists, are you unhappy with your paintings but you can't figure out why? It's probably your compositions. I'm going to show you how to improve your compositional skill and make your next painting 10 times better. Some of my paintings are really bad, like my colors are off and my trees just look bad. Okay, fine. I can work on my color theory. I can work on my trees. But with some of my paintings, I feel pretty good about them until I get close to the end or somewhere near the end, and suddenly it just feels off or mediocre or blah. And I'm wondering to myself, what's wrong with my painting? And for a long time, I couldn't figure out what that was. I couldn't nail down what the problem was. Well, it's just one word: composition. So what is composition? It's just the arrangement of the elements and the shapes in your scene that you're about to paint. And the problem, though, is that composition can be really complicated. There's this guy named Edgar Payne. He wrote this book that's pretty much like the Bible on composition, especially for landscapes. It's called Composition of Outdoor Painting. And he's got like 15 different basic types of composition, and he breaks that down even further and goes into a whole lot of detail. And it's a great book. You should get it if you're interested in painting and composition at all. But with all of that information, if you're new to the idea, you're just trying to start out in painting on your artistic journey, man, it can be so overwhelming. And it was for me when I first started out. I still had trouble figuring out, why did my compositions look bad or mediocre or blah, and what could I do to make them look better? Well, the good news is it's not that hard. There's a lot of different types of composition, but today we're going to focus in on what you can do very simply to improve your next composition. All right, so my wife and I went down to this creek nearby not too long ago to go hiking. We like to go out in the outdoors. And I started taking pictures, of course, because that's what I do, try to get good ideas for my next paintings. We're standing on the edge of this creek, and the water was just a beautiful color. And it was wintertime, there wasn't a lot of foliage on the trees, but overall, between the rocks and the water, the whole scene just looked great. So I tried to grab some pictures. And here's one picture that I took. Later, when I looked at this picture, I just wasn't super happy with it. And breaking down the scene and thinking more about it, here's what I see are the problems. So when you think about your composition, there should be one thing that you focus on, that you want the viewer to focus on. There should be one thing that's kind of the hero of the painting. And for me, it was supposed to be the creek. But the problem with this photo is that the creek doesn't take up really that much of the scene. When you look at it, you break it down, it's really only this section right here. If I want the creek to be the hero, I need to give it more space. I need to give it more room. The other problem is, where am I leading the viewer in this scene? I want them to go somewhere. I want them to go into the painting for it to be a nice, good, dynamic composition. And where is the viewer going in this painting? Well, the viewer is just pretty much going right here. And the problem here is that spot is directly in the middle of my painting. And that's not very interesting. Okay, so this next picture, I think I was standing almost the exact same spot in the creek, but this one is just looking the other direction. This one is a lot better compositionally. Number one, the place where I'm leading the viewer in the scene, the focal point, way down here, is not in the center anymore. So that really helps add interest to this composition. But the other thing about it is the water takes up much more space. I lean the camera out over the water a bit, and I got more of this reflection right through here. And it really helped to capture the hero of this scene, which is the creek, which is the water. So putting this all together so far, we want our painting to be about something, and it needs to be one thing. It could be the sky, it could be a field, it could be a river, a creek, it could be a tree, but it needs to be about that one thing. And then within that one thing, within that scene, you need to find the hero. You need to find the focal point. Where do I want my viewers to go into that scene? And that focal point should not be in the middle. Now, there's something called the rule of thirds. And if we break down our scene into thirds, draw some lines. So directly down here, and across here, and across here. Generally speaking, I want my focal point to be at the intersection of two of these 1/3 lines. Doesn't have to be exact, but if you put it there, that's just a good rule of thumb, and that will help you get the focal point out of the center and in a more interesting place. So we've done that. We've started with a good overall composition. We've found a focal point. It's off center. What's the next step? How do we take it even further and make an even more dynamic composition? All right, so here's the painting that I did of this scene. So obviously I chose the more dynamic composition up front, and I can't stress enough, finding a good reference photo with a dynamic composition in it already is much simpler than trying to come up with it on the fly as you're painting. So make sure you find a good or take a good reference photo first. But notice as I develop this scene that we are directing the viewer to the focal point. So the reason that this scene looks better than the other one I showed you earlier is not only because the focal point is off center, not only because the water, which is the hero, is taking up more space in the scene, but also because I have a lot of lines and shapes in this scene that are pointing me to the focal point. Let me show you what I mean. So first of all, here on this far bank, there's a shoreline, and that leads us right up here to where I want my focal point to be. And of course, we've got this nice reflection. Notice the triangle shape. Triangles are great. They're like arrows, and they point us into the scene. And then the rock bank here curves right around out to that focal point. These shadows in the rocks, this line between the rocks and the rest of the shoreline, even this tree line up here and this tree line here, all guide us into this focal point. And then on top of all of that, if you notice carefully, I added in what's called a redbud tree just to draw a little bit of extra attention. So the reason that this is such a dynamic scene and this works so well is because all of those lines are pointing at the focal point. That's what makes a dynamic composition. When you have a lot of lines and shapes in your scene pointing to that focal point. Let me show you another example here. So completely different subject matter. And again, notice the lines. Where am I trying to go in this scene? To the focal point right here. It's nothing real specific. It's just a part of the trunk that's up higher on the tree. But now notice all the lines that are pointing to that focal point. This line leads us in. This line leads us in. The branch here, even this tree on the side sort of leads us in. And the whole trunk here is just bringing us to that point. So we're pointing at the thing. We're pointing at the focal point, bringing all that attention of the viewer to that one spot in the painting. All right, one more example. And this one is a little more complex. So I want you to watch carefully what we've done with this scene. So this is the same creek, the first one I showed you, just a different area where there's lots of rocks and boulders. So there's a lot more complexity in the scene. The banks of the creek are not as defined. And so I had to find a different focal point here. At first, when I first took this picture, I was thinking my focal point was going to be this waterfall right here. But the more I started developing this painting and paying attention to the scene, I realized that there was a lot going on that actually led me, instead of here, to this spot right here. The light, and then a lot of the lines in the scene. And the lines are what I want you to pay attention to. We can also draw attention with color, with light, with contrast, but the lines and the shapes are going to draw us in. So notice all the trees in the background. They're bringing us down, first of all. Notice this big rock here on the side, almost triangle shaped. It's pointing us this direction. Over here, we have some lines pointing us into the scene as well. Down here, we have this rock, again, almost triangle shaped. Down here, we have some shapes that are also, again, almost triangle shaped. And then we have the creek itself that kind of meanders a little bit, but brings us down to that point. We have this bright edge here that starts to bring us into the scene to get us to that creek. We have this line that can take us in another interesting path, but again to that creek and down. And then this flow between these rocks. Everything is kind of pointing us, drawing us right to that focal point there. So this scene is more complex. The composition is more complex, but the idea is still the same. We want all the lines as much as we can, the shapes, drawing us into that focal point. Okay, so what have we learned? How do we make a good composition? Number one, you got to have a good focal point. Got to have a hero in your story, a hero in your painting, a hero in your composition. What is it that that painting is about? Put the focal point off center so it's not as boring, it's not sitting there right in the middle. And then use the rest of the lines and the elements and the shapes in your scene to point the viewer to that focal point. It's really that simple. Are there a lot of other types of composition out there that you could dive into and learn about? Yes, absolutely. But a lot of them come down to this principle. Just pick your focal point, put it off center, and then point at that thing. And that's it. It's pretty easy. Now go try that and see if that makes your next painting 10 times better. If you have questions about composition, let me know down in the comments. If you had success with this idea, I'd love to hear about it. Let me know what you did. Let me know about the scene that you painted. Now here's one more final bonus tip, and this one is really important to me. Go make something every day if you can. Go create. It makes your life so much better. Again, if you found this video helpful, please consider liking it, subscribing to the channel. If not, that's okay too. Now go make something.